The observation deck of the Defiant Horizon hummed with a tension that transcended the usual background noise of a deep space vessel. Captain Elena Rodriguez traced her fingers along the quantum reactive glass of the primary viewport, watching the cosmic dust shimmer like silver threads against the absolute darkness. This far from Earth, space wasn't the silent void of historical imagination. It was alive, unpredictable, and filled with whispers of unknown civilizations. Dr. Akira Nakamura, the ship's chief xenoanalyst, studied a holographic representation that twisted and pulsed with complex data streams. His augmented neural interface allowed him to process information at speeds that would have driven a conventional human mind to madness. Unlike the military personnel surrounding him, Nakamura viewed this mission as more than a potential conflict. It was the ultimate scientific expedition. "The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything in our database," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Fractals of light danced across his retinal implants, each representing a potential communication signature from the unknown regions they were exploring. Rodriguez understood the stakes better than most. Her family had been among the first wave of deep space colonists, lost during the Centauri incident 15 years earlier. An entire colony simply vanished, with no explanation. Just fragments of quantum disruption and unexplained energy signatures. That personal history had driven her through the ranks of the Terran Interstellar Exploration Corps, pushing her to understand what lurked in the darkness between stars. The Defiant Horizon represented humanity's most advanced technological achievement. Constructed in the orbital shipyards of New Singapore, the vessel incorporated breakthrough technologies that were still classified at the highest levels of global security. Quantum adaptive hull materials that could reshape themselves in milliseconds. Computational systems that didn't just predict potential threats but could strategically model thousands of potential engagement scenarios simultaneously. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the ship's communication and psychological warfare specialist, monitored a series of complex linguistic algorithms. His workstation was a maze of holographic displays, each representing different potential communication protocols. Where traditional military strategists saw communication as a means of gathering intelligence, Chen viewed it as a complex weapon, a way to understand, predict, and potentially manipulate potential threats. "Captain," Chen called out, his voice carefully modulated, "I'm detecting micro-fluctuations in the quantum background radiation. Something is different." Rodriguez didn't need him to elaborate. After years of deep space exploration, she had developed an almost preternatural sense of impending change. The ship itself seemed to respond to her heightened awareness. Micro-adjustments in environmental systems, a subtle recalibration of defensive protocols. Dr. Nakamura's voice cut through the growing tension. "The quantum signatures are forming a pattern. Not random. Definitely constructed." His neural interface was now fully engaged, transforming the holographic displays into a three-dimensional representation of something impossibly complex. What they were seeing wasn't just data, it was a message, or a warning. The ship's artificial gravity momentarily fluctuated, a barely perceptible shift that would have gone unnoticed by anyone less attuned to the vessel's intricate systems. But for the crew of the Defiant Horizon, it was a signal. Something was approaching. Rodriguez felt it in her bones. This wasn't going to be a routine exploration mission. Everything they understood about humanity's place in the universe was about to change. "Full sensor sweep," she commanded, "and wake up the rest of the command crew." As if in response to her words, the first quantum disruption began. The first wave of Krell-Tax weaponry arrived not with a sound, but with a quantum signature that momentarily transformed the fabric of space itself. Most ships would have been annihilated before their sensors could even register the attack. The Defiant Horizon did something entirely different. In the ship's primary computational core, a system known internally as the Adaptive Response Matrix, ARM, came alive. It wasn't artificial intelligence in the conventional sense. It was something far more complex. Developed by a team of post-singularity researchers who had long since disappeared into their own theoretical constructs, ARM was a living algorithm that didn't just process information. It consumed, analyzed, and reimagined threat responses in real time. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reyes, the ship's quantum systems engineer, watched in a state of controlled excitement. Her life's work was being tested in the most extreme possible scenario. The ARM wasn't just deflecting the incoming energy, it was breaking down the fundamental quantum signatures of the attack, understanding its core construction, and preparing a response that would redefine interstellar conflict. Quantum deconstruction at 63%, she muttered, her augmented gloves dancing across holographic interfaces. Each movement was a complex mathematical equation, each gesture a potential salvation for the entire crew. The bridge crew moved with a synchronicity that bordered on the superhuman. Years of joint training, psychological conditioning, and technological augmentation had transformed them from individual humans into something more. A unified organic technological organism capable of processing information and making decisions at speeds that would have seemed impossible a generation earlier. Dr. Nakamura's xenolinguistic algorithms began parsing the Krell-Tax attack patterns. What seemed like random energy discharges to conventional sensors revealed themselves as a complex language of destruction. Each weapon pulse carried more than kinetic energy. It contained informational layers, tactical communications, psychological warfare vectors. "They're not just attacking," Nakamura said, his voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos. "They're communicating." Rodriguez understood immediately. The Krell-Tax weren't simply trying to destroy the defiant horizon. They were sending a message to humanity. A warning. A demonstration of technological superiority that had crushed countless emerging civilizations before. They had no concept of what humanity would become. The ship's outer hull began to shimmer, not with traditional energy shielding, but with a quantum adaptive membrane that was literally rewriting its molecular structure in response to each incoming attack. Exotic matter generators buried deep within the vessel's core began to activate, creating localized spatial anomalies that would have been theoretical madness to most scientific establishments. Marcus Chen's communication systems picked up something unexpected. Buried within the Krell-Tax attack patterns were layers of communication that went beyond simple weapon coordination. Psychological warfare signatures, threat assessment protocols, cultural memory imprints that suggested this wasn't the first time they had encountered a potentially resistant species. "Captain," Chen called out, "I'm detecting cultural memory fragments. These aren't just soldiers. They are carrying the collective trauma of hundreds of subjugated civilizations." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. The Krell-Tax weren't just a military force. They were a civilization built on the systematic elimination of potential threats. Every attack was a performance, a demonstration of power meant to break the spirit before the physical destruction began. The ARM completed its first full analysis of the incoming weaponry. What happened next would be recorded in interstellar archives as the moment everything changed. The Krell-Tax energy weapons, each pulse carrying enough destructive potential to vaporize entire planetary surfaces, suddenly found themselves redirected. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Transformed. 3 massive Krell-Tax capital ships exploded in rapid succession, their own weapon signatures turned against them with a precision that defied known physical laws. The communication channels between the alien vessels dissolved into panic. Mathematical probability models suggested this was impossible. Their tactical algorithms had no framework for processing what had just occurred. Something was terribly, impossibly wrong. And this was just the beginning. The silence that followed the initial assault was more terrifying than the attack itself. Lieutenant Marcus Chen understood that true warfare happened in the spaces between destruction, in the psychological landscape where perception became reality. His station was a living ecosystem of communication algorithms, each designed to do far more than simply intercept or decode. These were weapons of a different sort. Precision instruments capable of dissecting the very fabric of an alien civilization's collective consciousness. The Krell-Tax communication network was a marvel of biological technological integration. Unlike human communication systems that relied on discrete signals, their network functioned more like a neural web. Each ship, each individual was both a transmitter and a receiver, constantly sharing not just information, but emotional and experiential data. Chen's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During his doctoral research, he had specialized in synapsological communication theory, a field so cutting-edge that most academic institutions considered it pure speculation. The Krell-Tax communication patterns resembled complex neural networks more than traditional communication systems. "They're not just talking," Chen muttered, fingers dancing across quantum-responsive interfaces. "They're thinking collectively." Each communication burst carried layers of meaning. Tactical information intertwined with cultural memories, threat assessments mixed with ancestral trauma. The Krell-Tax didn't just remember their past conquests. They relived them continuously, a perpetual state of psychological reinforcement that had allowed them to systematically eliminate countless emerging civilizations. Dr. Akira Nakamura approached Chen's station, his augmented neural interface allowing him to perceive the communication patterns in ways no unmodified human could comprehend. "Look at the linguistic fractals," he said, highlighting specific quantum-encoded segments. "These aren't just messages. They're psychological conditioning loops." The implications were profound. The Krell-Tax communication system was a form of continuous cultural programming. Each transmission reinforced their species' core beliefs: superiority, inevitability of conquest, psychological domination. But humanity offered something entirely unexpected. Chen began to construct a response that was less a message and more a psychological weapon. Drawing from deep research into comparative xenolinguistics, he crafted a communication sequence that would do more than interrupt the Krell-Tax network. It would fundamentally challenge their collective psychological framework. The transmission contained carefully constructed quantum-encoded sequences that would appear differently to each receiver. To some, it would resemble a tactical retreat. To others, a complex negotiation protocol. To a select few, it would trigger deep-seated cultural uncertainties that the Krell-Tax civilization had carefully suppressed for millennia. Captain Rodriguez watched the process with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. The Defiant Horizon was doing something no human vessel had ever attempted. It was engaging in psychological warfare at a civilizational scale. "Transmission sequence initiated," Chen announced, his voice calm but charged with an electric anticipation. The first signs of breakdown were subtle. Communication patterns between Krell-Tax vessels began to fragment. Micro-hesitations appeared in their collective decision-making processes. Centuries of unquestioned cultural supremacy began to develop microscopic fractures. Nakamura's neural interface picked up the changing patterns. "They're experiencing collective cognitive dissonance," he observed. "Our transmission is introducing variables their cultural algorithms can't immediately process." This was warfare beyond physical destruction. They were attacking the very foundations of the Krell-Tax civilization's self-perception. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rice monitored the quantum systems, tracking how the psychological transmission was interacting with the ship's defensive matrix. The arm was learning, adapting, transforming each incoming threat into a potential source of intelligence and strategic advantage. The Krell-Tax fleet's perfect formation began to fracture. But something was building. A massive energy signature was developing at the center of their formation, something they hadn't yet revealed. Chen looked up, a moment of genuine uncertainty crossing his face. "Captain," he said quietly, "something doesn't feel right." The calm before the next phase of conflict had arrived. The quantum fold cannon materialized like a nightmare made physical. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a cosmic architecture of destruction that defied every known principle of quantum mechanics. Most species would have been paralyzed by terror. The crew of the Defiant Horizon saw an opportunity. Dr. Elena Volkov, the ship's xenoengineering specialist, had spent her entire career preparing for impossible moments. Her hands moved across a holographic interface that looked more like a living ecosystem of light and mathematical probability than any traditional control system. Each gesture was a complex equation, each movement a potential salvation. "Quantum stabilization field initiating," she announced, her voice a study in controlled intensity. The weapon before them could theoretically collapse entire star systems. Its construction suggested technology centuries beyond human understanding, a manifestation of computational and physical engineering that married biological adaptation with quantum-level manipulation. But the Krell-Tax had made one fundamental miscalculation. They didn't understand human unpredictability. Deep within the Defiant Horizon's core, a system known as the Probabilistic Engagement Matrix, PM, came online. Developed by a team of theoretical physicists who had long since disappeared into their own research, the PM wasn't just a defensive system. It was a living algorithm that could deconstruct and reinterpret threat matrices in real time. Captain Rodriguez understood something the Krell-Tax did not. Survival was as much about imagination as it was about technology. The quantum-fold cannon began its initialization sequence. Most computational systems would have immediately identified it as an extinction-level threat. The Defiant Horizon systems did something entirely different. They began to map its quantum signature, not to defend, not to deflect, to understand. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rice watched the computational cores transform. What looked like defensive preparation was actually the most aggressive form of technological intelligence humanity had ever conceived. The ship wasn't preparing to survive the weapon, it was preparing to comprehend it. "Quantum resonance mapping at 47%, Rice called out. Each percentage point represented a breakthrough that would have taken conventional research teams decades to achieve. Dr. Edgar and Nakamura's neural interfaces were working overtime. The weapon's quantum signature wasn't just a method of destruction, it was a communication protocol. Complex layers of informational density that suggested the Krell-Tax viewed technological systems as living organisms. "It's not just a weapon," Nakamura muttered, his augmented perception parsing impossible layers of information. "It's a message." Marcus Chen's communication systems began to decode something extraordinary. The quantum-fold cannon wasn't simply a tool of destruction. It was a cultural artifact, a demonstration of technological supremacy that carried layers of psychological warfare far beyond mere physical annihilation. The Krell-Tax believed in the performance of power as much as its actual application. They had no concept of what was about to happen. As the weapon began to activate, the Defiant Horizon did something no known vessel in recorded galactic history had ever attempted. Instead of attempting to survive, it began to synchronize with the weapon's quantum signature. Not to deflect, not to absorb, to transform. The energy that would have obliterated entire planetary systems started to dissipate, absorbed and redistributed through systems that didn't just defend, they learned. Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest smile. "Now," she said quietly, "we counterattack." The quantum-fold cannon, the pinnacle of Krell-Tax technological supremacy, began to unravel, not through brute force, but through a form of technological comprehension that bordered on the metaphysical. What the Krell-Tax had intended as a demonstration of absolute power became something else entirely. A lesson in human potential. The Defiant Horizon entered a state of metamorphosis that defied conventional understanding of technological systems. Its nano-reconstructive hull was more than a defensive mechanism. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of adaptive intelligence. Dr. Elena Volkov stood at the intersection of biology and quantum engineering, watching as the ship's molecular structure rewrote itself in real time. Each nanocomponent was a discrete intelligence, communicating through quantum entanglement protocols that made traditional computer networks look like primitive signal drums. "Structural integrity at quantum resonance," she reported, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and strategic calm. "We're no longer just responding to the threat. We're anticipating it." The ship's adaptive response matrix, ARM, had moved beyond its original programming. What had begun as a sophisticated defensive system was evolving into something closer to a living organism. It didn't just process threats, it understood them, internalized them, and transformed them. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rice monitored the computational cores that powered this impossible transformation. The traditional boundaries between hardware, software, and biological intelligence had completely dissolved. Each system was learning. Each response was a form of collective intelligence that transcended individual components. Quantum neural mapping is showing exponential complexity, Rice called out. Her augmented interfaces revealed layers of computational activity that would have been incomprehensible to human minds just decades earlier. The Defiant Horizon was becoming more than a ship. It was becoming a sentient ecosystem. Captain Rodriguez understood the true nature of their technological evolution. This wasn't just about survival. It was about redefining the fundamental understanding of technological adaptation. The Krell-Tax had spent millennia perfecting a form of technological imperialism. They viewed their advanced systems as tools of conquest, instruments of cultural suppression. They had no concept of true technological symbiosis, the idea that technology could be a living, evolving entity that grew beyond its initial design. Marcus Chen's communication systems detected something extraordinary. The ship's adaptive technologies were beginning to generate communication patterns that were neither human nor machine. Something entirely new was emerging. "Captain," Chen said, his voice tinged with a mix of scientific wonder and strategic caution, "the ship is developing its own communication protocol." Dr. Ecker and Nakamura's neural interfaces were working at maximum capacity. The Defiant Horizon was generating quantum signatures that suggested a form of collective intelligence far beyond any known technological system. It wasn't just adapting to the Krell-Tax threat. It was learning from it, incorporating it, transforming it. The nano-reconstructive hull began to display properties that bordered on the miraculous. Energy attacks that would have obliterated conventional vessels were now being absorbed, analyzed, and transformed into additional computational resources. Each incoming threat became a source of intelligence, a new layer of understanding. Volkov watched in fascination as molecular structures rearranged themselves with a fluidity that defied classical physics. "We're witnessing a form of technological speciation," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "The ship is literally evolving in response to the threat." The Krell-Tax fleet, with all its centuries of technological supremacy, had no framework to understand what was happening. Their weapons, their strategies, their entire conceptual understanding of technological conflict was being systematically deconstructed and reimagined. Rodriguez knew they had crossed a threshold. This was more than a battle. This was a fundamental reimagining of what technology could be. "Prepare for full quantum integration," she commanded. The Defiant Horizon pulsed with a light that was neither mechanical nor organic. Something was about to change, not just in this battle, but in the fundamental understanding of technological intelligence. The ship was ready to counterattack. The moment of true transformation arrived not with a thunderous explosion, but with a quantum whisper that rippled through the fabric of space itself. In the Defiant Horizon's Strategic Command Center, holographic projections danced with possibilities that defied conventional military doctrine. Captain Elena Rodriguez understood that this was more than a battle. It was a fundamental challenge to galactic power structures that had existed for millennia. Dr. Imani Okoro, the ship's senior strategic analyst, had spent her entire career studying the complex interplay of technological and cultural conflict. Her augmented analytical systems were parsing information at speeds that made traditional computational models look like primitive counting tools. "They're not just a military force," Okoro muttered, her fingers tracing complex probability matrices. "They're a systemic civilization. Every action is part of a multi-generational strategy of cultural suppression." The Krell-Tax had conquered hundreds of emerging civilizations by understanding a fundamental principle. True conquest happened long before the first weapon was fired. It began with psychological conditioning, with the systematic elimination of hope, of potential. Rodriguez saw something different. Where the Krelltax saw a linear path of conquest, humanity represented something far more dangerous: radical unpredictability. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reyes had been monitoring the ship's probabilistic engagement matrix. The computational cores were no longer simply responding to threats. They were generating entirely new frameworks of strategic interaction. Each potential scenario was not just analyzed, but actively reshaped. "We're moving beyond defensive strategies," Reyes reported, her voice a calm counterpoint to the cosmic drama unfolding around them. "We're creating entirely new paradigms of engagement." Marcus Chen's communication systems detected something extraordinary. The quantum-level interactions between the Defiant Horizon and the surrounding Krelltax fleet were generating communication patterns that were neither intentional nor accidental. They were something else entirely, a form of unintentional dialogue that transcended traditional understanding of conflict. Dr. Akira Nakamura's neural interfaces were working at maximum capacity. "They're experiencing collective cognitive dissonance," he observed. "Our very existence is challenging their fundamental understanding of technological and cultural progression." The turning point wasn't a moment of physical destruction. It was a moment of conceptual demolition. Every system the Krelltax possessed was built on a fundamental assumption: that technological superiority equaled cultural dominance. They had spent millennia perfecting a model of conquest that relied on overwhelming force, psychological suppression, and the systematic elimination of potential resistance. The Defiant Horizon represented something they could not comprehend: a civilization that saw technology not as a weapon of control, but as a living, adaptive ecosystem of potential. Tactical displays showed something unprecedented. The Krelltax fleet, a force that had subjugated entire galactic sectors, was beginning to fragment, not through physical destruction, but through a form of systemic uncertainty that attacked the very foundations of their collective consciousness. "They're losing cohesion," Okoro announced, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. Not just militarily, culturally. Rodriguez understood the true nature of their engagement. This wasn't just about survival. This was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about emerging civilizations. Humanity would not be controlled. The Defiant Horizon began to generate quantum signatures that were less a weapon and more a declaration. Each energy pulse carried layers of information that challenged everything the Krelltax understood about technological and cultural interaction. A new paradigm was emerging, and the galaxy would never be the same. The hidden weapon activated with a quantum signature that tore at the very fabric of space-time. It wasn't just a device of destruction. It was a catastrophic algorithm designed to unravel the fundamental constants that held reality together. A localized space-time collapse. Most civilizations would have surrendered instantly. The crew of the Defiant Horizon saw an opportunity. Commander Elena Rodriguez understood the terrible calculus before her: save the ship, or save something far more important. The fate of humanity hung in the balance of a single decision that would be measured in quantum moments. Dr. Elena Volkov's hands danced across quantum reactive interfaces, her mind working at speeds that blurred the line between human cognition and computational processing. The weapon before them represented a technology so advanced it was almost metaphysical, a device that could erase not just physical matter, but the very possibility of existence. "Quantum entanglement matrix is destabilizing," Volkov reported, her voice a study in scientific precision. "We're looking at a potential reality-level disruption." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reyes had been preparing for this moment her entire career. The ship's adaptive response matrix wasn't just a defensive system. It was humanity's last line of defense against a threat that existed beyond traditional understanding of warfare. "Full quantum translation," Rodriguez commanded. Her voice carried the weight of generations, every human who had looked to the stars and refused to be conquered. The target was clear: not the weapon itself, but the Krelltax primary communication hub, the neural nexus that connected their entire collective consciousness. Dr. Akira Nakamura's neural interfaces were experiencing something beyond human comprehension. The weapon's quantum signature was a living thing, a complex ecosystem of destructive potential that carried within it the entire cultural memory of a civilization built on subjugation. Marcus Chen's communication systems detected layers of information that transcended traditional understanding. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a message, a final, desperate communication from a civilization that understood its fundamental paradigm was about to collapse. The space around the defiant horizon began to warp. Reality itself seemed to become fluid, malleable. Quantum probability waves crashed against each other, creating interference patterns that would have driven a conventional mind to madness. Volkov saw something extraordinary happening. The ship wasn't just defending against the weapon, it was beginning to understand it. Each quantum moment was an opportunity for comprehension, for transformation. "We're not just surviving," she muttered. "We're evolving." The Krelltax communication hub represented more than a strategic target. It was the central nervous system of an entire civilization, a collective consciousness that had spent millennia perfecting the art of cultural suppression. Rodriguez knew the true stakes of their mission. This wasn't just about preventing a weapons deployment. This was about challenging an entire galactic paradigm of technological and cultural interaction. Quantum translation sequence initiated, Rise announced. The fabric of space began to fold. Not tear. Not break. Fold. Like a piece of paper being carefully manipulated by an impossibly precise hand. Chen's communication systems detected something unprecedented. The Krelltax communication hub wasn't just receiving their quantum translation, it was being fundamentally rewritten at a civilizational level. Millions of years of cultural memory, centuries of technological supremacy, entire generational strategies of conquest. Unraveling. The calm before the final phase of conflict had arrived, and humanity was about to make its ultimate statement. Silence filled the defiant horizon's bridge, not the absence of sound, but a profound quantum resonance that carried the weight of a transformative moment. Half the Krelltax fleet had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not defeated, transformed. Captain Elena Rodriguez gazed out at the cosmic aftermath, understanding that they had done something far more significant than win a battle. They had fundamentally altered the galactic narrative. Dr. Imani Okoro's strategic analysis systems were working overtime, processing data that defied conventional scientific understanding. "We didn't just engage in conflict," she said quietly. "We've initiated a civilizational reset." The communication networks across known space began to buzz with fragments of information. Diplomatic channels, intelligence networks, scientific research stations, all were receiving fractured transmissions that suggested something unprecedented had occurred. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rice approached Rodriguez with a data projection that looked more like a living artwork than a traditional report. The quantum translation didn't just disable the Krelltax communication hub, she explained. It rewrote their entire collective consciousness. Fragments of Krelltax vessels drifted like archaeological evidence of a civilization in fundamental transition. Where traditional warfare would have celebrated destruction, the defiant horizon had achieved something far more nuanced, a form of technological diplomacy that challenged every existing paradigm of interstellar conflict. Marcus Chen's communication systems were capturing something extraordinary. The surviving Krelltax vessels weren't sending signals of retreat or defiance. They were broadcasting a complex quantum signature that seemed more like a collective moment of profound realization. Dr. Akira Nakamura's neural interfaces parsed the transmissions. "They're experiencing a form of collective awakening," he observed. "Centuries of cultural conditioning are being fundamentally rewritten." The ship itself seemed to breathe, its nano-reconstructive systems settling into a state of calm after the intense quantum engagement. The adaptive response matrix was no longer just a defensive system. It had become something closer to a living, learning entity. Dr. Elena Volkov monitored the ship's quantum signatures, her scientific curiosity burning bright. "We've essentially performed a civilizational intervention," she said, "not through violence, but through information." Rodriguez understood the true significance of their mission. This wasn't just about protecting humanity. It was about demonstrating a fundamental approach to interstellar interaction, one based on understanding, adaptation, and potential rather than subjugation. The diplomatic implications were staggering. Every known species would be analyzing the Defiant Horizon's quantum translation, trying to understand how a seemingly junior civilization had managed to fundamentally alter the dynamics of galactic power. Intelligence networks across multiple star systems began to activate. Research stations, diplomatic corps, military strategists, all were scrambling to understand what had just occurred. "We're no longer just observers," Rodriguez said to her crew. "We're participants in a larger cosmic dialogue." The surviving Krell-Tax vessels began to disperse, not in retreat, but in what seemed like a collective process of recalibration. Their communication patterns suggested a profound psychological transformation, the first steps of a civilization learning to exist without the framework of perpetual conquest. Chen's communication systems detected something unexpected. Buried within the quantum transmissions were seeds of something revolutionary, a potential for interspecies understanding that went beyond traditional diplomatic frameworks. "They're not just changing," Nakamura observed. "They're evolving." Rodriguez looked at her crew, each a testament to human potential. They had entered this conflict as an exploratory vessel. They would exit it as something far more significant, a message to the galaxy. Humanity had arrived, and everything was about to change.